Welcome back to Civil Discourse Now. I'm Mark Small, co-host with Paul Ogden. We're coming to you from Big Hat Books, 6510 Cornell Avenue in Broad Ripple, which is on the north side of Indianapolis. Our audience here is enjoying our show. Here's the audience there. Big Hat has an excellent... Big Hat Books is owned locally, so it's not part of a chain. It's one of the last things we're seeing. Bookstores aren't around anymore. Big Hat is a locally owned. It's one of a kind. It's a bookstore here in Broad Ripple. Liz has for sale here Destiny of the Republic, for example. It's a history of Garfield, President Garfield dying in office. It's an excellent store. They have space here to rent. G.C. Lucas Gallery shows art up here. This is all stuff you're not going to get like if you walk into a big department like Walmart or something. This is stuff that's all local, and it's really kind of cool. Paul?
All right. Well, I believe Bill had a...
Yeah, but I didn't know if you wanted to add something about the store here.
Well, we're here on the second floor of Big Hat Books, and they have space to rent here. So it's a very nice room, and would be good for a lot of events, maybe even fundraisers.
That's true. And we're here talking about the so-called right-to-work legislation that's presently pending before the Indiana General Assembly. And our guests are Bill Groth, who's an attorney here in Indianapolis. Areas of practice are appellate, labor and employment law, election and voting rights law, and Social Security disability. Jeff Cox, who works in eminent domain, wills and trusts.
Other litigation.
And other litigation. Bill, there's a point you were making right before we ended the last segment.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to talk about the process that we're involved in now with regard to this right-to-work law. Because, we can talk about the substance, but that's probably going to bore people. But let me just say this. What bothers me about this debate is that it's based on false pretenses. The argument is made that this is an economic development tool, whereas the economic studies, of course, tend to disprove that. We hear our governor on ads, TV ads that are paid for by people he won't tell us, they won't disclose to us, that 1/3 of businesses will not locate or even consider locating in Indiana because we don't have a right-to-work law. You ask him or any of the people who are proponents of this law to identify a single employer who wouldn't come here solely because of that or primarily because of that. I have never heard anybody identify a single business.
I haven't.
Now, so this is what really bothers me about this process. We're not hearing the truth. We're not hearing the facts. And at least my view of this is that this is all about political power, all about politics. The Republicans have control. They want to keep control. They want to consolidate their power. And they're being backed by large corporations for that purpose.
Well, this came out of the blue to me. I mean, there was nothing said about right-to-work legislation in any candidacies in campaigns in 2010 that I recall.
I didn't hear it.
And so all of a sudden, we pop up in the 2011 General Assembly, and my gosh, we've got to get a right-to-work law through this legislature now. And in 2010, of course, saw the Supreme Court issue one of the worst decisions in quite some time with Citizens United. I'm sorry?
I thought you said 2010, wasn't it 2011?
No,
it's
Citizens,
January 2010 with Citizens United.
Yeah.
And so you have that come in, the 501c4 organizations that are being funded by large corporations, they don't have to disclose who they are. All of a sudden you have anti-labor measures being taken all over the United States. The particular legislation here is backed by a not-for-profit corporation, a 501c4. The resident agent for that corporation is James Bopp, who argued Citizens United before the United States Supreme Court. And so...
Is this the smear by association tactic?
No, it's saying that the person who really wanted to get 501c4 through and get this kind of secret funding mechanism, gosh, he's running this anti-labor...
Well, I don't think that right to work right now in Indiana is out of the blue. Republicans in the state have wanted it for at least the past 15 years. and they've been trying to find ways to get it done. Now, you were not going to get it done when Pat Bauer was in control of the House as House Speaker. It just wasn't going to happen. They see an opportunity now, and they want to take it. Now, I don't agree with right to work, but I can see the logic, and they're trying to push for it right now.
I'm only calling it right to work because that's the little shorthand for
I
describing.
know. I agree with you on that.
But here's what gets me is, it's like Al Capone's character in The Untouchables. He goes, you want to come at me for something, don't come at me for a parking ticket. Come at me for what it is you want to do. You want to push something through the legislature that has as much of an impact as this legislation does, then run on it as a platform, as a candidate, and say you're going to do it. Don't just get the power and then shove it up the public's butt once you're in office and say, oh, well, you elected us, this is a representative government, this is a republic, and so we're using our best judgment to do this. Do it so I can vote for the person or not.
It's called accountability.
So the representatives should only put forth those issues they campaigned on? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying that this is a pretty big rabbit to pull out of a hat.
According to the Ball State study, it's not. It's not going to make a difference.
No, according to the Ball State study, which is only on a narrow slice. One.
Okay.
Two, if it's not a big issue, then the Republicans shouldn't push it. But they say it's really important. Third, look at what happened to state employees in the state in terms of what Governor Daniels did. The first day he was in office, that didn't even get subjected to vote by executive order. He de-unionized, took representation away in collective bargaining from the state workers. At least
they had collective bargaining.
They did up until that point.
They did
were represented by what was called the unity team.
Okay.
yeah, because what Bai did, what Evan Bai did was Bai negotiated this thing where he could, by decree, by executive order, determine what should be done. Daniels came into office and did just that, and took away their ability to negotiate.
I think public employee unions are sort of a special case. They're not the UAW, they're not the Teamsters, they're not the steel workers, because in those situations we've got the UAW, the steel workers, they negotiate with management for wages, for benefits, and they try to lobby for worker protection, or they can negotiate some of that with their management. But there is a contract between them that is the result of negotiation between two adverse parties, and I'm using that term guarded because they don't have to be enemies. They're not enemies. They're just different interests negotiating a contract. When you have a public employee union, and I understand the reason behind them is because these public employees need to be protected from patronage. That's the historic reason for public employee unions.
Whistleblowing.
Yeah, and whistleblowing. But there's a statute for that now, but it was the public employee unions who campaigned for it. There's a legitimate reason for public employee unions. But the problem is when you have a public employee union, then they start to contribute to candidates who are actually in charge of the other people on the other side of the negotiating table, essentially. And those candidates are always willing to give more money to public employee unions to keep their support, and the public employee unions just to support those candidates. It's a circle. It's you might call it a feedback loop. And what happens is that you end up getting no adverse negotiations at the table between the public employee unions and the state, because the state is beholden to the public employee unions.
So in these negotiations, the public employees unions were able to get like $400,000 and $500,000 a year for their individual workers.
Look at California. I'm not saying it happened here, but look at California, where some of their salaries are pretty outrageous, and they won't give up a penny of it.
Federal employees, and 20% of federal employees make over $100,000 a year.
Yeah, 20% of federal employees, you start totaling up, and there aren't, the total number of federal employees is not that great. And consider some of the positions you're talking about amongst those federal employees. How many of them are positions within the Veterans Administration? How many of them are higher level?
I can give you an example. I know someone in PR at the IRS, someone who is in computers at the IRS. They both make over $100,000 a year with tremendous benefits. They do very well in federal government.
Now, in Indiana, let me state that...
Are they union?
I don't think federal employees are union. Are they?
I-
Bill, though.
Most of them are.
Yeah.
Now, let me say that in Indiana, most of the state employees are grossly underpaid.
Yeah, and now there's something like
Don't even
14 or
agree with that.
1,500 people in ASME in Indiana, contrasted with like 24,000, I think, in 2005 when Daniels signed that into law.
Well, the local employees, like people in the city of Indianapolis, are generally paid more than state employees are. In fact, the state employees haven't seen a raise in about 3 or 4 years.
They recently got one.
That's not what I was
January
told.
1st. I think they did. It was in paper.
That's not what I was told.
One thing I think I want to clarify is also that people are not required to be members of unions. They're only the only requirement would be that they contribute to the costs, like Bill said earlier, of negotiation and representation. In other words, they're paying the costs of somebody getting for them the benefits that they get. And that was established also in NLRB versus General Motors, which was the United States Supreme Court decision in 1963.
That's the fair share. The trouble is, I don't know how they do the calculations, but the fair share is always about 90%. I'm sure Bill can correct my percentages on it. They always seem to be suspiciously high that, only 10% of us for political activity and 90% is for negotiation.
But that's true. I mean, that's the way the numbers break down, because the audit that's required by federal law has to be a certified audit.
Mm-hmm.
So it can't be just some jackleg who comes in and takes a quick look at the books and says 90%. It's extremely detailed, very costly for unions to have to do, but that's what the law is and that's what they do. You see, this is another problem I've got with this debate. You know, they talk about its economics, and then they talk about its employee freedom, and we know it has nothing to do with employee freedom. That's a complete red herring, a pretext, because, as you point out, the Supreme Court has held in the private sector, as in the public sector, no one can be compelled by contract or by law to join a union. We already have the choice in this, just like Paul, when you worked for UPS, you didn't have to belong to the union. You could have just said, I don't want to belong, I don't want to participate in union activities.
Right.
You still would have had to pay your fair share. You could have also exercised your right to say, I don't believe in the political clauses that the Teamsters are supporting, and you would have been entitled to a rebate of a portion of your dues. So employees, it's not about employee freedom, it's not about economics. It's about raw politics and political power.
And it's
do we all agree with that?
It's about union busting.
But why?
Politics is always-
But why do they want to bust unions? Because unions are the one institution that can offer a little bit of a blowback to corporate abuse. So they can act as a little bit of a counterweight. And if you get rid of the unions, who's going to support candidates who are running against Republican candidates?
Well, I mean,
Especially in light of Citizens United, where, open the spigot.
well, I don't think candidate funding is the issue here with respect to unions. I think it's just a lot of rich people who own businesses don't want to have to deal with unions in collective bargaining, and they just want to get this thing through.
But they're still going to have to deal with unions, even if this thing goes through, right? It actually may, in a perverse way, make it easier for unions to organize, because the old bugaboo is, well, if you let a union in here, you're all going to have to pay union dues. Well, now all you have to do is vote. Majority of the employees vote for a union, and they don't have to pay dues, but the employer is still going to have to bargain with them.
I suspect that would not be the case.
And you can continue that thought, but we're at the end of the segment. Jeff, sorry to do that. We'll be right back.